everyone, I'm Caro Herrera and welcome to my channel, The Mental Traveler. Today I'm very excited because I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite stories out there, Star Wars. And today especially I'm going to be reviewing the 3D CGI animated series, The Clone Wars. Developed by Dave Filoni, who is very familiarized with the vision that George Lucas had. The Clone Wars first came out in 2008 and then it ran for 6 seasons. Each season has about 22 episodes of around 20 to 24 minutes. Season 6 though, the last one, only has 13 episodes. And I think that one of the main reasons why The Clone Wars stopped was because Disney bought Star Wars. But though it breaks my heart that we can't get any more episodes, I am very glad that in this show we get to see exactly what happened in the years between episode 2 Attack of the Clones and episode 3 Revenge of the Sith. And before I begin, I want to let you all know that this will be a video full of spoilers, so if you haven't watched The Clone Wars, beware. I've been a huge Star Wars fan since I was little, and I particularly enjoy the prequels, and my favorite character is Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader. And his love for Padme Amidala is one of my favorite romantic stories, but I had never seen The Clone Wars until very recently. I'd heard about it and I guessed what it was about due to the title, but I was always postponing watching it. Everything thankfully changed a few months ago because I started having these really cool discussions with another Star Wars fellow fan, particularly about Anakin and Vader, and basically she was the one who encouraged me to watch Clone Wars. That is why I dedicate this video to her. Her username in Tumblr is the Far Bright Center. I'm gonna be quoting her a lot in this video, and you can find a link to her blog in the description box below. To quote the Far Bright Center, or as I'm going to refer to her from now on, TFBC, in Clone Wars we have the tale of the Jedi becoming embroiled in an unwinnable war that actually goes against their own ethics. And it is basically the story of people holding onto their souls through it all. But anyways, before the series, a film came out called The Clone Wars in the same year, 2008. And this movie introduces the characters that we're going to be seeing in The Clone Wars. It sort of gets the story running. And it begins with Anakin, who has just passed his Jedi trials. The Jedi Council thinks that he should have a Padawan because they want him to be more mature. This Padawan learner is no other than Ahsoka Tano, a 14-year-old Togruta girl. And at first Anakin isn't very pleased with having an apprentice, but things change pretty quickly. And once you watch this film, you're ready to begin with the TV series The Clone Wars, which I really enjoy. And to quote TFBC, Clone Wars are very violent at some points because it deals with a full-fledged war. And in that surface, it is a kids show, but it has a lot more going on under the surface. But back to the plot of The Clone Wars. Many people unfortunately don't like the prequels, but just as TFBC said, whatever you feel that is wrong with them, that is remedied in The Clone Wars. It shows a lot of well-developed individual storylines, and if you weave them together, you see exactly how it was that Palpatine managed to manipulate things and events to turn the Republic into the First Galactic Empire. We see many familiar faces from the films, and then we're introduced to many original characters as well. Ahsoka, for example, she's a very well-loved character in the Star Wars fandom, but still the general public doesn't really know that much about her or hasn't even ever heard about her, which is kind of sad. But anyways, The Clone Wars has some very scary villains, and it's really well done how as the series progresses, the episodes start to get darker and darker, setting the viewer in the mood for Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith. And as TFBC pointed out as well, you can see these, for example, in the way Anakin Skywalker, the shadows under his eyes start to get darker and deeper as the series move forward. Still, there are some scenes that are really funny in The Clone Wars, and it's not only about war but about politics, and it shows so well why the war seemed endless because of Palpatine's machinations. I guess though that if I had to criticize something about The Clone Wars, it would be that it doesn't put that much emphasis on the PTSD that Anakin and other Jedis were going through, even though they're Jedi and they're trained for it or something. They were at war and saw horrible things and did horrible things for approximately 3 years. It must have taken a toll on them. And I think that this was exactly what happened to Anakin, among other factors, to lead him to the position that he finds himself in Episode 3. But I get that as a kids show, it can really deal with the atrocities of war in detail. So rather than focusing on Anakin's PTSD, we see that he was a really well-beloved, famous general who always wanted to inspire confidence and trust and security in the clones under his charge. My favorite aspect of it though was the romance. Not only does Obi-Wan get a romantic storyline as well, which I really liked because it was this sort of alternative universe of the Anakin Padme storyline, and also Obi-Wan is really funny and wise. We also get to see a lot more about Anakin and Padme's marriage. In the films we only get to see how their love blossomed and how it tragically ended. But here we see what happens in between, and it adds more depth to their relationship. And to quote TFBC, I think that Clone Wars is trying to include Anakin and Padme moments while also exploring certain sides of it that were maybe underexplored in the main films, such as just how tough it must have been to have to sneak around in order to have intimate time together and also hide their true feelings for each other in public. Still, not all of it is tragic. We also see leading some really happily married couple moments. And another thing that I really love about the show is that it taught me so much about the clones. Before, I'd never even really given them that much thought. I guess this is because the prequel spin-off didn't have time to show just how tragic Order 66 really was. But here we have clones becoming friends with the Jedi for years, and they go through so much together, and this just makes more poignant what happens in Revenge of the Sith regarding how the clones couldn't help themselves and had to turn against the Jedi in the end. And we get to see why exactly this happened, and that was sort of an unjust position in many points. And they're similar to the Jedi in the fact that they had to lead their lives by these sort of specific rules, putting duty always before anything else. But I really adored how we have this episode in season 2 called The Deserter, where a clone basically deserts the army and forms a family, which brings into focus that the no attachments rule for both Jedi and clones was a pretty harsh rule, and the way this clone who deserted was able to protect his family out of love rather than out of duty was a really fascinating thing to explore and to dwell about. So yeah, Clone Wars sort of highlights that Siths and clones and even Jedis live in absolutes. It's almost like all or nothing, emotions or duty, and this is just wrong. It's one of the things that shows that the Jedi Order was sort of in decline at the end of episode 3. TFBC pointed to me that the Jedi Order we see in this period is very different from the original one. So we see in this show the side effects of some of their bad decisions and actions. For example, the longer the war went on, the more the Jedi became this sort of policemen to the Republic, and getting so involved with a specific government harmed them. Another thing that I really like about the Clone Wars is that we get to see all the planets and storylines that are presented, because it shows how vast was the galaxy and how hard it was to end the Clone Wars and to try to keep the separatists from leaving the Republic. But moving on, some of my favorite bits about Clone Wars were when we see General Tarkin. It's a sort of bridge between the Republic era and the Galactic Empire. And then there's this episode where Anakin has to pretend to be a slaver, and this brings up really bad memories for him from his time when he was a kid and a slave. And then there's this episode where the Jedi have to go to this prison called the Citadel, and to quote TFBC again, the Citadel is incredibly symbolic and important. It was designed as a prison for Jedi who had lost their way. Anakin tells his Padawan Ahsoka not to come along with him in this mission, but she follows him into this prison regardless, which could be symbolic to her refusing to abandon Vader in the final episode of season 2 of Star Wars Rebels, when Ahsoka is able to break into Anakin's physical and mental prison, even if only for a moment after she breaks a part of his mask. But I think that the episode that captured me the most was the one that presented the Mortis arc. It was really eerie, and it reminded me of this sort of Greek tragedy, and it deals with Anakin, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan ending up in this really weird planet outside of time, and Annie ends up learning that he's to become the chosen one by turning into Darth Vader, and he hates this and he tries to stop this future from happening, but then someone makes him forget it, so he has no memory of knowing what will happen to him. So that whole moment was really heartbreaking and powerful to watch. But there were some storylines that I wasn't particularly fond of. For example, at first I didn't really like that they had brought Darth Maul back, because I had this idea of him as he's in The Phantom Menace, a quiet, evil Sith apprentice. But now that we have him back, my initial impressions of him have to change the more they dwell on his character. When he's first reintroduced into the show, it's so terrifying to watch, and not at all for a kid's show, I think. And it was also really dark in the Clone Wars in the final season when Yoda is trying to learn how to become a Force ghost or something, and he meets this sort of evil Yoda, like sort of Gollum and Smeagol in Lord of the Rings. And I also found really sad the story of Darth Maul's brother, Savage Opress. What happens to him and the way he becomes evil is really hard to watch. It's almost as powerfully poignant as it is when they erase R2-D2's and C-3PO's memories. I think this is really unfair, and it shows that being a droid was also hard in these times. Oh, and I also love the Clone Wars because my favorite actor of all times, David Tennant, lends his voice for one of the characters. I give the Clone Wars a 5 out of 5 stars review for so many reasons. Not only does it have some really good voice characterizations, to the point that I thought Ewan McGregor had actually lent his voice for the show, reprising his role of Obi-Wan.
I'm enjoying this far too much.
But it has some really beautiful effects and the writing is excellent. And that's what makes this series so special, that it's so high quality. And you can feel that the people behind it really care for the show and the story. And they deal with so much complex stuff, even as they give us nods to other Star Wars time periods, and the way they deal with Anakin's character. I'll mention more of him in a couple of moments. And I also really like how they have some episodes where, for example, Obi-Wan goes off on a mission on his own, or Padme as well, so it shows how every character can stand alone without help from their friends. And regarding Ahsoka, whom I really didn't expect to like that much at the start of the Clone Wars, TFBC and I agree that she's a really important character for Anakin's storyline. His training of her and the friendship they develop has a really big impact on them both. Anakin does mature because of her, and she learns so much because of him, which helps her to survive later on. She's like his little sister, and it's really fascinating to watch a master-padawan relationship where they have a male and a female rather than just a male and a male or a female and a female. This dynamic, this relationship between them is really important in the future when Anakin is Darth Vader. It shakes them both so much. In Clone Wars, the way Ahsoka's storyline at the end of season 5 ends, that is really well done and heartbreaking, but it also helps to increase the feelings of frustration against the Jedi Order that Anakin is feeling at the start of Revenge of the Sith, as well as his feeling of being misunderstood by them. But yeah, the episodes that lead up to Ahsoka's leaving the Jedi Order are really intense. That chase through Coruscant and the way everything she seemed to do end up incriminating her more and more in this crime that she didn't commit, and then having Anakin chasing her through the streets and these tunnels is sort of reminiscent to Ahsoka being chased by the Empire later on, and by Vader and his minions as well. To quote TFBC, I think Ahsoka did the right thing though, in terms of needing to be true to herself when she leaves the Order. She could no longer fully trust the Council, and they had not been able to trust her. It's very much a parallel to Anakin himself, only his version of leaving the Order finally ends up being a way more violent course. And it's also symbolic because in many ways Ahsoka represents the goodness in Anakin and the light inside him. She's almost like a piece of him, and it was thus so telling that it was Padme who was defending her on her trial, just as Padme defends Anakin to the end with her last breaths, and how there is still goodness in him. The time has come to talk about my favorite character in the Star Wars series and how his storyline is dealt in the Clone Wars. It's my personal opinion that he's sort of misunderstood by some part of the fandom in his appearances in the prequels. And particularly in episode 2, there's also these people in the fandom who maybe prefer him as Vader than as Anakin. I personally adore him in episode 2, and I love him both as Anakin and as Vader. I don't always approve of his actions, regardless of whether he's Anakin or Vader, but I do love him and feel very protective about him. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because I want to believe that some people who don't like him in the prequels will find him more likable in the Clone Wars. We get to see how great a commander he was, how very loved and respected he was by the clones under his command. He may not have been the best Jedi, even though he was a chosen one, but he was definitely great at war. And in this beautiful novelization of episode 3 by Matthew Stover, my favorite book in the Star Wars universe, we get to see how Anakin, through the Clone Wars, got this nickname of being the hero with no fear. And we see in the show how many of his fellow Jedi generals and his own apprentice deeply love and care for him. I do feel that there is some process of maturity lacking in his character if we only focus on episodes 2 and 3. But Clone Wars serves as a perfect bridge for this. We see how he goes from being a 19-year-old conflicted and emotional young apprentice to being a conflicted young man. He is so young, he has to carry so many burdens, emotions. Even though he does mature in many regards in the Clone Wars, his inability to let go of the people he cares for, it is shown how hard this is for him. I don't see this as a flaw in his character, but rather as a proof of his humanity, and it's a manifestations of the events that happened in his life and how he has to cope with them. As TFBC said, Clone Wars go on with no end in sight. Anakin gets darker and darker shadows under his eyes, like someone suffering from nightmares or PTSD, and the loss of his mother and Ahsoka, the months away from Padme, and then the nightmare he has in her, the news that he is going to be a father, his disillusionment with the Jedi Council. It all makes it so easily for Palpatine to target him. And he did not start out on such an easy foot as many of the young Jedi, most of which were taken very early as little children and raised from the start in the temple. So he already has these emotional burdens, even as a child. His mom being a slave, his dreams of being a Jedi and the best pilot in the galaxy actually happening because apparently he had this big responsibility of being the chosen one and learning that loving his mom was wrong and adapting to the fact that things he wanted and liked that were outside the Jedi code were now out of bounds. He just didn't have it easy. All of this reminds me of the quote, "With great power comes great responsibilities." When Anakin becomes a Padawan learner, he isn't aware of all the things that he has to give up and sacrifice by becoming a Jedi. And yet he has to deal with them when he's grown up and these situations confront him. This is it for my review of the Clone Wars. I hope you all enjoyed it and want to talk with me about the show or about anything that I said here. Thank you so much for watching. In the description box below you can find the link to the Far Right Center's blog on Tumblr, links to the trailers for the Clone Wars film, the Clone Wars Season 1, as well as their respective IMDB pages. With nothing more to say at the moment, I bid you all an excellent week. I'm Carolera, the Mental Traveler. Goodbye.